Okay, I'm back. So I'm going to step over the code and just try to understand the functionality there. I'm not really sure. It's not very clear on my mind because yeah, I have to clarify first. I know that they create a temporary file and then they use that temporary file some ways. Like based on the previous times that I've seen this, I think that they know that do they don't use the original. Like there's a mismatch between the stuff that happens when you're running the engine and the classes that they use to manage the state on the editor. So that's the kind of thing that is kind of confusing to me because based on the way that it stores the file there for the game, it's just gonna store the class and some additional information and yeah, and then whatever functionality that is gonna happen when the game is executing is gonna be based on the structure of the class. So I wanna think about exactly what do I need to know to create the class, to create the file from the code. Yeah, that's basically what I have to clarify. I'm just gonna wait to see if it's streaming. Probably gonna stay for 1 hour and a half, then I'm gonna take a break and finish doing the time here. The beginning is kind of hard because I have to clarify exactly what I need to do there. So the hardest part, like I said on the last stream, is to figure out how to synchronize the states. That's the part that I'm struggling to think about because I think that like no matter what, I'm gonna have to like keep working on the code, obviously, because that's the whole point of the thing. So, and this is something that like, it's kind of confusing since the beginning because the line is not very clear, but like basically building the game and the stuff that creates the game, which is the like something like the editor, is kind of like the same thing, but the only difference is the gradient of where you stop. So when you're developing the application, you're creating the stuff that is going to create the data for the game, but it's kind of similar to creating the game because obviously some point of the code is going to be the stuff related to creating the data structures to write on the files. So I think I have to clarify more exactly what's the information. I understand how they read and write from the sing file and how do they derive what is the main thing and stuff like that. So I'm going to open the game that I have there. It's basically this file here, I think. I have to initially one of the things that so I'm gonna remove the breakpoint from here because I was initially I thought the error was because of this, but then I realized it was the global signals thing. So this is the thing. Like one way to think about it, I think it's probably the correct way. So the way that you do it is you build everything that you need, and then after you build, have all the data structures that are related to the thing. Then you figure out how to use the project settings function that they use, and probably the resource classes as well. To call the functions to write all the information to the file. It is kind of confusing. Because the way that I was thinking about it initially is to, and I'm still not 100% sure, obviously, is like probably the way that this is going to evolve, that I'm going to have some I'm gonna have some standard functions probably. So like this is kind of the part that is difficult to figure out or to clarify in my mind. It's exactly what I want to achieve because I think that most likely what's gonna happen is that on this folder here, I'm gonna have some files and probably some functions. Some files with some functions, obviously, that creates standard components, probably. And then the projects, each project is gonna be just a variation of the combination of this. So basically, based on everything, on how everything works, it's just gonna be a funnel, and then it's gonna be the related to the variance. So probably the best thing to do in the beginning is to just try to, but I think I should try to create the scene first that I want there. And then from that, one thing that I was thinking about is based on the example that I did there, because the way that I did, I'm inheriting the button from the editor. So that can be kind of bad. Because then it kind of, I'm not really sure if it's gonna force, I think it doesn't force the application to run, to have the build that includes the editor, but maybe it does. So if that's the case, then I have to copy the code from the editor and put it on the modules, which is not very good. But I think it doesn't, it's probably not from the editor actually, now that I realize, because I import from the scene, and because you can use these nodes to build your own game. So I have to see, it's not that hard to think about, because I can just build the game manually, and then see what kind of nodes I can use for building the game, and then it becomes more. I think the parts that is related to the editor is just the main classes that use the other classes. This function is the one that I assume is going to be the one in the beginning there's going to select what kind of scene you have. But it is kind of weird because of the path. So there's some point that they just copy the scene, even if it's no or something like that. Yeah, I guess this is the part that I was kind of thinking about. So I wanted to see from the project manager what happens in the first time that you create a project to load the scene. Because I think on the examples here, if you check on the scene, this save scene and new scene, whatever, the initial scene is just gonna copy from a previous one, I think. This part is the one that I'm not really sure. So the question is what happens in the very first time that it loads a scene? So does it create a scene? How does that work? But then the problem is that you can't really, or I think you can compile to load the project manager, but I'm not really sure. It becomes another thing to compile and figure out how to set up the debugger for that and step over. So one thing I can do is just open the project manager and then search for the labels that the project manager uses and try to figure out. I'm not really sure if that makes sense. I think it really depends on how I structure things there. So I think there should, but the way to think about it, like if I think about it, just creating main components that are going to be reused all the time, and that's what the headless is going to be, then it doesn't make a lot of sense because I could just create that. Like this is going to be for the modules, I think, when it comes to the, and maybe the complexity of the components creates the funnel where each unique thing is a module, but then it's part of the module, but then the combination of the things is going to be from the headless. So the modules just determine, and this is the gradient that is going to converge forever, or diverge depending on the way you're looking at it. But then what's the question is how to synchronize, I think. How do I synchronize? So if I start developing something from the editor, and then I want to do some other part on code, what is the best way to create a framework or kind of like a mindset to, based on whatever is built already, to keep developing on that? So I'm thinking about this stuff because of the questions that I wanna ask myself to make it easier to understand or to focus on what matters here. Just plus 11. So this is the thing. I'm just gonna go fast over this, then I'm gonna put spend time on the new thing probably, the breakpoints on the new thing. This one already has the player's thing here when it gets to this point, so I have to see. Once it gets out of this function, then I have to see how you call this. I think it's gonna be calling from the project. Maybe you can look at the project settings. He probably holds the information here. So the information is here, and then I use the project settings class to load this. Oh, so now I remember. So they have another class on the editor node, which is called editor data, and that's the class that is responsible for managing everything. And then that class, this is kind of the problem. It's kind of annoying because I'm gonna have to figure out how the editor data does everything. And then I have to look into the constructor and maybe a bunch of functions. Yeah, that's what I have breakpoints there as well. I already spent some time looking at it. So editor data, editor scenes is gonna save is a vector of editor scenes, which is a class. And I have to think about how does it initialize this. The main thing to do is to clarify on the steps there. I need to have a clear vision of what I want to do. So like everything else is gonna start, everything is a funnel always. So like one is the main questions, and main question to ask to clarify to know the direction. The other thing is how to progressively implement the things to see if I'm on the right track. I think I'm hesitant of deleting this because not sure if I'm gonna need, but I think I don't need this because this one's gonna be a plugin that creates the visualization on the editor. Maybe at some point, but it doesn't matter that much. You can figure that out, I think, later. And this is the stuff that I wrote down for to solve the other stuff, so I'm just gonna. This kind of stuff, it doesn't matter that much, I think, for the game itself, because it's just stuff that it doesn't matter if it's a little bit slower to. I mean, maybe it does matter because the global signals are going to be used on the game, so maybe it matters. But I think like it's not going to be that much of an impact, so it doesn't matter. The plugins is related to other stuff, I think. Plugins is just related to the additional functionality that the editor have, but it's not related to the scene. The main data structure for the scene is the edited scene here. And that's how it figures out. And some of the nodes you can put a value as a member variable of the node, I think, which is the path, which is going to be the path to the scene. So this distinction, I'm not 100% sure how it works. If every node has a path, or just the scene nodes, the root of the scene nodes that have the path, and then how does it check to see whether or not something is a scene? Because eventually on the application, everything's going to be part of the scene tree, which is the main class, and then the scenes are going to be subtrees of the scene tree. So figuring out the distinction. So this is the part that I was saying. I think that is kind of confusing, but this is the load. I'm gonna look into the other one because this one it already has a thing here, which is gonna be the path to the file. So it checks to see if the editor data on the current edited thing, I think, is equal to the scene it's trying to load, and then if it is, it's gonna set that as the current one. If it isn't, it's probably gonna get from somewhere. And if I remember correctly, it initializes everything with the -1 as well for the ID, I think, or something like that. And then later it's gonna check to see if it's -1 or not. But the main functions I think that it uses to write and read stuff from the file is gonna be from the resource loader. So the load, there's other functions that are used from this thing. There's gonna write information on the file. And this is a packet sync thing. It's probably gonna use the packet data, just the one same data structure that they use to write the exports temp. Basically, writes the gain to the file. Also, project settings uses packets data, which is kind of confusing to understand. I'll try to avoid doing confusing things or spend like the more functions I can reuse from them, the better, obviously, because then you don't have to spend a bunch of time. I'm just gonna go over fast on this one, and then I'm going to probably after this just press F5, try to see the save scene. You're just gonna processify. The thing is, I would try to simplify as much as possible as well, because I think that a lot of this stuff is gonna be related to just displaying stuff on the editor. So, but the annoying thing about simplifying is that I'm going to have to spend a bunch of time. Because obviously it would be easier if I could just call this the like the highest layer of abstraction that they so that they do everything else and just pass whatever information. So probably the best thing to do is to create another project, I think. So both, I'm going to close this stuff because I was just thinking about I should create another project and see this thing here because I assume that if you don't save, don't select the main thing, the project is not gonna have a main thing here. So I have to understand. This is kind of the thing because I have to understand how they load everything on the first place. So how did they get? And this is I know that's gonna be a little bit annoying because I already spent some time based on the other stuff that I was studying. There's going to be just on the globals setup function that it calls to figure out whether or not you're running the editor or a game. It's going to use the packet data class to open the file using project settings, I think, as well. Or file access and dir access, maybe all these classes, probably all these classes. Then it's going to open the project, or I think it's going to try to open the package file as well. And then read the executable as well to see if there is the resources there. And it's probably gonna it is definitely gonna read this file here as well to get the information. It should load the project settings, I think, or to update the state of the project settings with whatever you have here. Then the rest of the functionality is going to be based on that. So I need to understand or to clarify more how does that part work. So because probably on my code, what I'm going to have to do is just use functions from the project settings to get the state, whatever state exists here, and then like build the states or build the mental model for the how the state of the game is going to be or the application based on the project settings first, and then after that from the resources. So the first part is translating the project settings and the resources into a data structure, which is going to be the tree that represents the game, and then I have to think about the additional logic based on that, I think. Check main, it will load sync tree by default. Yeah, I know that. Try settings check. It should run main loop time. Yeah. I didn't dive too deep into this, but I'm aware you can do this. It is not the point of what I'm doing is not that. It's just to figure out based on. I basically just have to clarify what this state is, I think. Which I think is gonna happen probably. And it is kind of annoying because of the functions. I don't understand very well how it works. It's kind of confusing. Like the export template function is very confusing. The way that they write the resources and the way that they read the resources. So let me think about this. Question is what are the steps here to clarify this? I'm not really sure if we should go from here. This is a part of the -1 that I was talking about. So usually I think initialize with -1. So the option here is going to be -1. Yeah, the scene index is going to be -1, and then it's going to get... when you have the scene, probably is not -1. Oh, so it is -1. And this uses the editor data. So the question was, how does the editor's edited scene works? I think for understanding this, I have to look into the project manager thing, and then maybe compile. But I was trying to avoid figuring that out because it might be very annoying. I compile to the project, or maybe just change the... but if I don't pass anything, I think if I pass another flag there, then it opens the project manager. I'm gonna try to do this. Just see if it works. So I'm gonna... I think it's probably gonna be easier to look from... maybe not easier. So I have to think about how to clarify this relationship, because the initialization of the editor is very annoying because there's so many things that happen, and I don't want to spend a bunch of time. So basically, yeah, let me think about some questions. So I think first question is, what do I have to... or how does the editor load or update editor data for the first time? It's probably getting information. Probably gets information from project settings and editor settings, which are the classes that are going to use the files there that is on the standard root of the project. There's both project Godot, and there's another file that I forgot the path, but it's probably here somewhere, and probably on the editor, and then here. So I know this project metadata is used at some point, but I think there is a file that is specifically for the editor settings. Maybe it's this editor layouts or something else here. Could be this. No, this is for the assets. So that's probably one of the functions that is calling that. So maybe it will... well, the one that I know is the global. So it's just globals, setup. Actually, sure. So this is the main one. Globals is going to be project settings. So this function, I know that it sets up the project. I think it sets up for the first time. And I was studying this function to figure out how they check to see whether or not you're running a game or the editor. So basically, when you run the version that is compiled for the game, it looks for the package file, or if you export it with the embed option, it writes the resources on the executable itself. I think that the way it writes the resources is based on the path, but I'm not really sure about it. This is the part that is kind of confusing. And then based on whatever is going to happen here is going to determine whether or not you're running the engine or you don't have the file. And it's going to look for some standard paths based on this stuff here. So this is probably the function that loads the settings for the first time. Just basically the stuff that you're saying there. So this probably reads, this gets from the... I don't remember exactly where. It's probably the project settings somewhere. So, but it's basically the internal paths that they have, which is a tree for determining the settings. So we're gonna reflect the GUI, obviously. And then this function is just going to loop over things and create a prop, which is a variant for each thing, which is basically reading the project Godot file, probably, and then updating the state of the class with whatever key value pairs you have here. Yeah, I know. This pay main pack here, I don't know very well, but I think it's an option you can pass if you want to specify some stuff. This is the function that reads the project Godot file. This app data is where they save this stuff, and then you can also there's also the app data local where they put the stuff that is temporary as well. I already looked into all this stuff because I studied the exports flow there to understand what is the difference between running the game and running the engine, and it's basically the same thing. The game is just the engine executable with the resources. You can embed the resources into the executable, or you can put them outside. And then on Windows, you use rcedit to add some additional information on the executable as well. So I think I can use this function probably then. But the question is, how does this relates to the editor data? That's the thing that I'm not really sure. So I guess I can look into the because the thing is, I remember like the editor node has a bunch of stuff, so it's not going to be very good to just read everything. And I want to find the easiest way possible to clarify this. But I think if I look into the editor data, editor node file, and then just search for the editor data initialization and try to understand that. And basically this function here is the main function that is gonna, whenever you click there on the main dock, this is always gonna run as far as I understand. And then based on whatever you click, it's gonna change the options that it sends there as when it emits. And this is gonna determine what function runs. So this creates a new scene, then opens the scene and all the other stuff. And this one saves the scene. So I think that's because the question is, maybe I don't need to know this stuff because of the thing that I said before, that the editor functionality is not necessarily like what I want, because I just need to figure out how to the flow of reading and writing from the scenes files, and how how does the editor and Godot keep track of the they basically use the file system class, but how exactly does that happen on the like how did they make sense of the structure of the project, and how does that change? I think that's the main part. Because then if I understand the flow of reading and writing to the files and how do they make sense of the file structure, then I don't need anything else. I can just load the settings using the same function there, I think. So basically I use project load settings on the my stuff, or maybe they have. And maybe, so I have to investigate this function here because they're putting on props, I think, as far as I remember. Props is a member variable of project settings, and that's the stuff that is going to hold the information, I think. So you can either save on binary or text. This part is the one that is kind of confusing. But maybe I can get from, like, it's probably better to get from whatever data they have on project settings. And I have to think about what is the best way to check to see. So the way that's probably going to work is going to be a loop, either a loop with control flow inside or a switch that is going to determine based on the settings what happens on the thing. So the initial stage, I believe that what makes the most sense for me is probably that the editor uses the same stuff. So like based on whatever project settings has, which was updating on the main setup, is gonna figure out whether or not the project has a main scene or not. Then based on that, it's gonna initialize the editor data with the state. So the state reflects the project Godot settings. Then after this is gonna, this is the part of the resources that is probably more confusing. But I believe there is a scene3 item class somewhere on the editor as well. But that part, like, so the challenge is clarify from both sides. At what point is the line that they meet? That the resources become the stuff that happens on the editor, and the editor becomes the resources. And it's probably through the resource class. Which I think is, so it's both, like the main classes are project settings, resource. Obviously editor data, but yeah, I spent a bunch of time looking into the, someone saying that a good way to follow stuff is to search for the items in the editor. Plugins, as far as I understand, is just for the extra functionality. So whatever happens inside of the viewport, for example, there's a bunch of plugins that are related to that. Plugins probably related to previews as well, but it's not related to the core functionality. The core functionality of the editor is not, the stuff about saving scenes is not a plugin. It's just from the editor node class. So the whole GUI from the editor is just the editor node class, and then each part of the GUI, each doc is its own class, the main class, let's say, which is a member variable of the editor. And then inside of these classes, there are some standard classes that they use, which is related to buttons and stuff like that. So the labels and the state of everything depends on that flow. And this interacts with the window through the display server window class, which creates the bridge through the input class. So it's sending state from display server windows to the GUI elements, which are control nodes, through the input class, which has the logic on the processing events on the main iteration. I think it's before that's probably on the OS. So here. So it's on this function here. So on this one, it creates the bridge between display server windows and the input class. Then the input calls the control nodes based on that, which is kind of slightly unclear to me. Because I do remember there's a function that they have probably on the display server windows that it keeps track of events that happen. And then these functions here are from Windows. So that function probably connects. It updates the state of the input based on whatever happened here. And then probably the other one is going to call some function at some point that is going to call the control nodes. But it is not that relevant, I think, for what I'm trying to clarify. Yeah, that might be possible. It's probably possible to hook a plugin, but based on the stuff that I've seen from previous times of stepping over, it doesn't have anything to do with plugins, the functionality that I'm interested on. It might be though, based on what you're saying. There's so much stuff, maybe it's possible, from what I've seen. The thing is, have to clarify more exactly what I want. The main function that is going to be called is one that depends on the state there. I think that's the last part that I was kind of confused. But actually, I clarified this at some point as well. It depends on the way that you initialize there, I think, because it's going to depend on the space server state. It's going to call this function, then this function is going to push the event, and then it's going to call some function from the control node. The control node is the class that you're using for the GUI. Then that emits an event, and based on the event, it allows you to put whatever functionality you want to happen after you interact with the GUI. The stuff that I'm more curious about is clarifying so it's probably the relationship between I'm gonna look into the editor node constructor. This is the first question probably to ask. I'm gonna close everything else so it doesn't confuse me. But I think that's probably the first thing to clarify. And then it's probably better to look from the engine point of view. How does it uses the state of project settings to initialize everything? Because obviously I want to do the same thing, but without using the GUI. So I think that makes more sense. So first, figure out, I'm gonna put here. So figure out, probably it's gonna be the other way around. Or clarify. So once I understand that, then I know the initial state. And so the thing to understand is the resources as well. So that's probably the main. So I'm gonna investigate first the project settings. Start from the beginning. Oh, so it is related to plugins. You were right. Yeah, but it's probably not related to the stuff that I wanna do there. Plugins is probably related to other functionality. It's not necessary to like the actual game. Because I imagine that the main use for plugins on the editor is going to be to change the editor's functionality, but not change the game functionality. And if it is to change the game, it doesn't matter anyway, because like the main part is to understand the flow of reads and writes to the files, I think. With this project metadata, I think it is important, and it is that JSON file that I was talking about there before. The thing is also interesting to know, because I know it can change from the editor settings. But I think that's this. So this is gonna run on some parts of the cycle. So notification, I explained this on some other string before. And notification changes the behavior of the class hierarchy and is the function called for each node at certain points of the cycle, the rendering cycle. Then each part that it calls is gonna send a different different value there, depending on what kind of part of the cycle it is. Each node has the standard signals that it has, and those are gonna be called on the object class, which is the base class, and then the object class is gonna call the notification function for every class on the hierarchy. An editor node inherits from node, I believe, and so this is gonna run whenever the notification is received by the engine. There's not exactly. So this happens after the node was already created. So it's basically gonna change some settings, or you're gonna check to see if the project settings has the settings and a global. This one is interesting to see. It's just getting the settings. This is the function that I remember that gets the props. So it's a function from the project settings. It's just probably reading the Godot file, I think. Not really sure. And then based on that, it updates the props. No, it gets from the props. Props is a member variable of project settings. Your game, yeah, that's what I was saying. Plugins are generally used to interact with your game objects in the editor, as the editor stuff is only compiled with editor. Yeah, that's. I remember seeing the plugin stuff when I was trying to. I was just stepping over. I stepped over a bunch of times on the editor constructor. So at the end there, they have at the end of the constructor they have a loop, and the loop initializes a bunch of plugins. And then I wrote down some stuff there. One of the plugins I believe is responsible for creating the visualization on the editor. So that's how I kind of know what's about, but obviously I didn't spend that much time looking into it. I don't know what's headachy. The only thing that I'm not really sure is what's so it probably so there's probably default values, and then you can override, and every time you override, it changes the state of this thing here. So that's how it knows. So if you have overridden, so it's probably on by default, the plugins, and you can put off. And if you turn one of them off, it's probably gonna append to this vector or whatever, or to this hash. This hash that has the settings and then loops over this. So it's getting the local vector from the hash, and then it's gonna loop over this settings. And if it finds based on the OS, it's gonna return the props for that, which is gonna be a variant. I think that's not the stuff that I wanna see now. I'm just gonna keep going. This one's probably saving the settings. So it's just updating the project Godot file. Every time you change the Godot, you probably call this function as well. I'm not gonna spend too much time on this now. I think this. I remember seeing the name of this function, but I think it only runs after an event. So this is probably related. But this is after it does some changes probably. So I'm just gonna continue there. I'm gonna be right back. There's another way to go about this, but I'm not really sure if it's worth it. So, one way to go about it is to open. So open the. So I can look based on the labels here on the project manager. and then look at the source code, try to understand what happens. I think that's probably the most productive. So what happens when you initialize a new project? Because I think that the main thing that is confusing me is the first time the editor doesn't know anything about the project, because at that point it doesn't have any scene. So based on the other stuff that I've studied on the previous times on the editor, I think what happens is that the way that I think about it right now is that the classes that the editor uses to display the information are decoupled from the classes that the game is going to use. So what happens is that the editor creates a data structure on somewhere along the editor node, which is called sing item 3, I think, or something like that. Then it uses that information to display the stuff that you can add, for example, on the sing based on the class DB. So it holds the information on this other data structure, uses the class DB to look for all the nodes that are registered on the class DB. Then based on that, it's gonna change the data on this data structure that the editor has to display whatever happens, and it's gonna use a temporary file to keep track of the things before you save. Then once you save the sing, what happens is that it takes the temporary data and then it uses resource loader or the resource class with some other functionality to translate that data and write to the sing file, and uses the file access to do that. Then after it does that, probably something changes on the edited sings. The edited sing, I think, is the main class that is used to keep track of the current sing that's being added. And the editor node has a member variable which is editor data. The editor data has a vector of edited sings. So each time you create an edited sing, is gonna append or push to that vector probably. So everything works based on that. The question that I'm not 100% sure is what happens in the beginning when you don't have any sing. So basically, what is the distinction between a project that doesn't have any sings and a project that does have sings, and what happens from the editor standpoint? So it's both that and the relationship between that and the project settings, because obviously in the beginning I think it's going to be based on the project settings. So, but it can be annoying, because if I go that route, what I have to do is just same stuff that I did on the other one. I look for the labels here, and then based on the labels, I can find the functionality. So for example, the create button is going to open the GUI stuff to select the file or select the path. So it opens this stuff, then you put the path here for the project. Then this one is probably going to be the one. And this one, it probably follows the same pattern that they follow on the other ones, but that the label here is dependent on what happens after. So maybe it's unlikely that I'm going to be able to... if I put this there, you're going to find the place that updates the data, which is the place that happens before the pop-up happens. So the pop-up emits, when you click on the create button, it emits the press event probably, and then inside of the press event is going to have some function that is going to change the label of this button here. And then it's going to call some other function on the display server to open this GUI element, which is probably controlled by some data, some other class. And then after you click here, it's going to be a button of the class that is a member variable of the class that is responsible for the button here. Then that function is going to, when you click here, it's going to run some other functions, and then it's going to figure out. But in order to debug this, I have to see, and this is the stuff that I was thinking about before, if I can debug from the, but I think I can. All you have to do is, I don't remember if you have to build a different build, or all you have to do is just pass slash project manager, and then it runs the project manager instead of running the... So maybe this is the first thing that I have to do. So I'm going to create another file. I also downloaded the previous stable version to see if the errors that I was getting before was related to the versions or not. So I created the other project. But I think that I'm going to create another project and then start from this point probably. But then, yeah, this is the question. I think what happens when you create a project is that it uses the OS class. I've seen this at some point as well. It uses the OS class to run another executable. It basically runs the engine again with different arguments, and that's the point of one of the functions there, I think, on the main start. It builds the arguments again, and then it calls the OS to execute the new command, and it's basically opening a child process to start the editor. So if that's the case, then the main difference is, yeah, so, but it can be kind of annoying if I have to create a new project each time to test this. So I guess I have to see on a new project what happens. So I'm gonna create a new project and then I'm gonna see. So I have to see based on the project Godot file before I create anything what happens there, and then compare with the other one. I think that's easier because I think all that's happening on the first time you create a project is just gonna run the executable again, and then it's gonna pass the path for the project with the editor. So the main difference is just gonna be on the project Godot, I think, of how the editor. So I'm gonna create a new folder and create a new project and then compare the files. So what can be the name? Enthusiast, and I want to have a career maybe well engineer or yeah. I'm not really the best person for this, man. I can help you if you want help on how to learn or how to think about learning, then I think I probably can help you, but for career stuff, I'm not very good. So what can be the name of this? Maybe sing study, yeah. So I'm creating another folder. I'm also gonna look into this thing first is probably to just compare the project Godot. I'm gonna look into to see the flag variables there. I'm pretty sure that I can also look on the S construct. I think it's probably it's probably a flag variable that you call you pass when you're executing the editor executable. It's not a. It can be both, obviously. But I think that the version that runs the project manager is the same version. Obviously, it is the same because I'm just running the executable there. So it's a flag variable you pass when you're executing. I think it's project manager. But here, oh, so it does have a project manager. So I can just open with that and then change there. I think I'm gonna do that. So let me think about this. I'm gonna create like this first, then I'll see if it's worth to. Obviously, so I think that the main difference between the two is just the configuration there. So just open launch.json. I have the configurations here for the debugger. This one I was trying to debug I'm gonna change this one. I was basically trying to debug a game to see what happens, what is the relationship between the script and the nodes. But now it's a lot more clear in my mind. The script is just gonna be a member variable of the nodes or the object class that is called script instance, and then it's gonna check when it's calling the notification if the object has a script. And if it has, then it's gonna call that. And also on the macros there that explains some points as well. It's gonna call those functions from the script if the node has a script. And that's how it integrates the events on the script. So basically here, Then I open this. Yeah, so here it doesn't have main scene. It just has this configurations. So the other thing I can do is obviously go on the other one and just delete to see what happens. Like open the project Godot file and delete the main scene. It's basically running the same executable, which is the developer version of the editor with a different argument to run. And then it creating a different configuration here, which is just gonna show what you put on the launch JSON file is just what shows here. So each one of these is an object you put here. Then the type determines what kind of debugger you're gonna use. And they have that on the documentation there on Godot. So let me think about this. What is the best way to? I think I have, because it's probably not worth. Maybe step over the editor. So I want to avoid. So let me see the other instances here. But I want to avoid having to step over all the stuff because on the editor node it happens. There's a lot of stuff that happens. But I think probably what I'm gonna do is just I'm gonna run the debugger but passing the new project instead of the old one. Just see how it loads this scene. Or to figure out what happens after the scene is saved. But I think I have to understand first, like on the initial setup, how does it? So this one is interesting. How does it? Because obviously it has to store the information somewhere, and I think it stores on the temporary files, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to load the editor if there is no sync files. So I think and this is the reason why I think that the data structures that the editor uses are decoupled from the one that the game's gonna use, because like they are basically the same, but they are stored in different places. That makes sense. So, and I remember based on the times that I've seen there on the save, that it's more like a data structure that is similar to the method bind that they use to register methods on the class DB, or it's a data structure that keeps track of the names and stuff like that, but it's not necessarily the same class. That makes sense. And then they use that to write, because I think that you probably also don't need the. I guess that this is the question to clarify. What exactly is necessary to write on the file? Because whatever it is on the sync file is not the whole information. So if you have only one node and you didn't make any changes, the only thing that is going to be written on the sync file is going to be the name of the node and some other information. And then depending on what kind of thing you do, then it writes more stuff. So I think one of the things is going to be the transformation. And for textures, it's going to be different as well because there's some other stuff. And then for GD script as well, it changes the information. And it's basically on sequence, like it writes the name of the node, and then right after it has everything that was changed until it gets to another node. So I think that's how it's going to be parsed. But the question is, what information is necessary to write or to create everything from scratch? And how can I keep track of what is the best way to keep track of this state? And then how do I make the distinction between like creating the functions that are going to create the project and thinking about the project as its own thing? Because it's basically the same. I think it gets complicated based on the scripts. I think that's the thing that is confusing me. Because for the nodes, it's kind of easy to think about because you don't need to have. So like if I clarify how to write to the files, then like it's all you have to do is just on the headless there, create the components. So create a function that creates the classes that I create from the modules. And then I create the structure of the scene. So basically the whole game is going to be a scene tree. So the other important distinction is the distinction between nodes that is the roots of a scene. This is also the important one. But after that, it becomes kind of easy because like the construction of the thing is just going to be synchronizing the state of the tree. So getting the initial state from the project settings and from resources using the file access. Then based on that state, changing, creating or adding classes based on that, and then converting that again to the scene files. But the thing that is kind of confusing is how do the script changes, because it's gonna be kind of like decoupled, and because they change the scene file as well. That's kind of the thing, because that's the main difference. Like if you use GD script and you attach GD script to a node, it's gonna change the scene file. But if I'm adding scripting functionality from the classes, then I'm changing the behavior of the class based on how it changes the class. So it's not going to change the scene file. And if I use the global events there that I created, it's also probably not going to be, it's not going to be on the scene file. The scene file is just going to have the classes. So it's kind of confusing now, but I'm not really sure what kind of thing. I know that I need to clarify something, but I'm not 100% sure what it is, if that makes sense. So it gets the path of the game from this thing. So this is probably so when you try to export the game and the game doesn't have scenes, it's gonna ask you to select one, or when you try to run the game and it doesn't have a main scene, it's gonna ask you to select one. So I think that this happens on this function here, or this thing, this dialog action probably happens. It is the thing that is responsible for asking you this stuff, or after you selected. So it just sets the. So this is actually, so it's probably that easy if I use the function straight from the project settings. It's probably gonna be a lot easier because so just figuring out the path of the settings, which is just gonna be reflected on the project Godot, I think. And the file is probably the name of the scene file. And every time you change the settings, you call this, and then you rewrites probably based on the state of the class. The thing is that I'm sure you will clarify like soon, but it's like I know that I need to clarify something, but I'm not 100% sure. It's kind of blurry on what exactly do I need to clarify. It's probably that function. It is that function there, menu option. Confirm. And maybe it is just as easy. The thing is, based on the way that I'm doing there, the headless is always going to run based on, so like it's below the editor, and like you need, or higher depending on how you look at it. But you need to compile everything from the editor to run the headless. So I'm gonna have access to the same functions here. So obviously I could use them. I think using them directly is probably not very good. It's probably better to use the project settings ones, because these functions are gonna be related to a bunch of GUI stuff as well. But it's probably gonna be as easy as just figuring out. I need to clarify the data that how do they format the data, but this string is probably the path to the file. So maybe I can decouple in my mind how the editor works and how I'm going to do things. So maybe like the main thing to understand is how does the editor make sense of the directory structure of the project. Because I think that's the main thing. So how does it load? So the project settings is the easiest, I think. Just gonna call the function to load the settings. Or based on the settings, it loads stuff. And the settings are based on the path, so the main one is the main scene, which I think is not. It's gonna be this thing here. So there's probably one to load, the one to set, so setters and getters. So I can probably go into project settings, see the get function, and then see what it returns, and then in the beginning there, try to get the main scene from the project. If it doesn't have, I do something, and if it has, I do something else. I think that's the stuff that I have to clarify. It's more the key is probably the synchronization. I think that's the hardest part to think about. So if I going to develop like a little bit from the code and some from the editor, what is the best way to make sure that they are synchronized, and how that's gonna evolve on the code? So maybe I have to do a Scarlet Draw thing to clarify this. Because once I understand this, I think it becomes a lot easier. Because basically the state of the code that runs on the headless has to depend on the state of on how the editor perceives the code perceives the resource structure. Or the other thing is what is the relationship between how does it make the distinction between normal nodes and nodes that are roots from sinks? That's the other thing that is kind of confusing. I'm not really sure what is the best way to clarify this. Like, what is the fastest way? Maybe it doesn't work like that. I think this because I remember seeing on the documentation that yeah, I'm pretty sure that the way that it works is through the servers. So the servers are the things that are going to change the thing. And I think that's the difference in the mental model that I have. I'm probably thinking about it the wrong way. So I think the only thing that matters is the main thing. Yeah, that makes a lot more sense. And it is easier to think about as well. So the way that I was thinking about it is that you have the sync tree, which is the main class, that is the whole game. And then along that sync tree, you're going to have different branches. And each one of these branches is the main branches are the sync roots. And then when you change the scene, you're just changing. But I think that the way that it works is that you always have one main root, which is the current scene that's being displayed. And the only one that matters is the main scene, which is the scene that you're going to show up first. Because all that is happening every time you change a scene is just replacing that node that is the root of the scene with another node. And the nodes are represented by the file. So it's like the project settings has the one that is the main one, which is the entry point of the application. And then the other ones are, it doesn't matter the order because it's going to depend on the functionality of the main scene. Because the only way you're going to be able to change scenes is based on the functionality of the nodes. You can do, probably usually is going to be through the GD script, but I'm going to do it from the modules, which is probably going to be based on either a hotkey or on a GUI element that you put there. That is going to be connected through an event, and then it's going to run the function. The function is probably going to run a server function, and then the server is going to replace the state. So there's something called resource ID, which is RID, and that's how the servers keep track of the resources. And this part's kind of confusing as well. It's related to the shaders as well. So I have to clarify more that. But I think that's how it's going to work. So you call a function in the scene tree based on whatever class you have. After the event is emitted, that function makes the main scene tree change the node that is being displayed. So it's going to just perform the operations to remove a node and puts the other one. And then every time that happens, you can put other events because each node class has the standard events. And then based on that, you can probably clear the memory. I'm not really sure if you're I think you are responsible for clearing, but I think it's gonna clear anyway, but maybe not. So I think here, for example, let me see the thing here. And so I have to look into the other one. So this is gonna be the only thing that matters, I think, when it comes to the scenes. And there is I think the function from GDScript is different than the function that the class has. So this can be kind of confusing to know which one I have to call there. But I know that I'm not, I think it's on the scene tree that it has the function that changes the scene. Because the scene tree is the main one, main class used to create the game, so. Yeah, it's probably changing this current scene. And this is gonna be the root of each scene. So I think that the only nodes that have the information for the path are the nodes that are roots of the scene. That obviously makes more sense. But each node is gonna have the member variable because it's just on the node. But the only ones that have the path to the scene are the ones that are the root for the scene. And then the way that it works is that you're gonna have the main scene, which is gonna be based on the configurations. And then the other scenes are only gonna show up through the functionality of the main scene. And because all the, so it has to be, so I think that the scene root's not part of the file. It probably gets the node. So I guess this is the question: is how does the scene tree get the? Because I remember the editor, I think it gets to the path that the node has. I do remember that the functionality to change the scene here is different than the one from GDScript. I think on GDScript you just change, or you get tree and then you do something like that. This one is, so I think you can either pass the path to the file or you create, this is probably the main data structure that they use to hold the information for the scene, which is package scene. So either pass the package scene or you pass the path. It holds the state of the scene. So this one is just a wrapper and calls the other one. So it creates the package scene with the resource loader, which was what I was thinking about. Because this is also called somewhere along the lines on the editor. So resource loader and resource saver are probably the main classes to read and write for the data files. Yeah, so probably what I would do, for example, let's say I want to have a GUI that a button that changes this thing. You just create it. You get a class, the button class, inherit from the button class, creates on the modules. Then you connect or you have another class. There's going to be a GUI element. Inside of that class, you have the other class you created, which is going to be the custom one. Then you subscribe to the press event on that button. Then inside of the function that gets emitted, or is the callback for the press, you call this changed scene, and probably you do it based on other GUI elements from that is the parent of the the button that represents the GUI element you want. Then that one, based on the state, or based on the state, depends obviously on how you're going to structure the GUI element to change the scenes. Then you would have the data that represents the path for the scene, which is based on the roots of the project. And then you just call this function passing the path. So you call the scene tree, which is a singleton, I think. Or you call the main loop. The engine has the function that gets the main loop. So maybe you call the engine first, or you call the OS, whatever one that allows you to access this, and then you call this function passing the new path. And then that probably replaces the current scene on the scene tree with the one that you pass. So I think it's probably easier than I thought. And then I can just copy this error here as well. Actually, I don't even need it because I can just call the function. So all I have to do is get the path for the scene. So the main thing that matters is the main scene, I think. The main scene and figure out the resources. So, because if I want to change, the challenge is synchronizing. That's the annoying thing. Because the problem with the synchronization is that it's gonna get into the gradient of variance of the data. It depends on the strategy that I'm gonna try to implement, which I think is gonna go based on. So there's gonna be functions that create components similar to React. So each function is like creating a node, and those are the ones that are gonna be reused, which is probably it is the same way that they did it on the editor, which I can also obviously copy. The thing that I didn't like that much from the editor is that it's kind of confusing to understand how the label changes. So I was thinking about whether or not there is an easier way to do this that is not as confusing. Because the selection of the label of the button changes depending on the functionality of the other button that is going to open the pop-up element. The other thing that I'm not really sure is the position. And based on the way that they do it, they use a bunch of enums to determine the states of the things that happen. So both the position and the style of the buttons and the thing, stuff like this. But I imagine that's how it's gonna go. So on the modules, for example, we have a bunch of classes that are gonna be composed on each other to build main components. Then on the headless, there are functions that connect those classes, creates the reusable components that change depending on the flow of data. And then the projects are going to change based on the variance of data. And then the line between the two is going to be a multifractal that converges towards infinity. And then the question is going to be how to manage what is the consequence of this to the editor. Because I have to think about like a project. I think the difference is like the project that is beginning. Let's say I'm going to begin the project from the code directly. The flow of data has to be dependent on this gradient, I think, from the beginning to the end. And then the variance is on the middle, probably. So for example, there's a bunch of, it's going to be like a square, I don't know how to say that. But I have, for example, situation where I want to begin the project from code and then later on edit from the GUI. Or I want to begin a project from the GUI, then later on edit from the code. I think it's usually more often that you're gonna want to build the beginning from. It's probably the same pattern as starting a project. So when you create a CLI for the beginning files of a React project, for example, where it allows you to follow a standard, and that creates the funnel because the variance of the data is going to determine the complexity of the project. So you're creating like a relative reference frame when you create the GUI, or when you create the CLI commands. It's probably going to be the same thing or similar. But then the question is, I guess this is the kind of the paradox because I have to build it to see how it's going to work. But I think it's probably better to start with this mental model where the thing is going to work initially for creating a project from scratch and then create based on the template. So I create components based on the new, based on the module stuff. I create components based on the functions. They create a template for stuff. But then how does the main function works? That starts the project in the first place. I guess that's the tricky part because it depends on what I'm gonna do. But obviously, there's gonna be patterns. And I think it's relevant to think about this stuff now because it's gonna change what I do in the beginning, I think, to start doing the beginning of the file. So now I have a decent idea of what to do in the beginning. So I think the main thing to do in the beginning is to use the project settings to get the settings that are relevant to determine. And this goes into the question already because it's going to be a different thing if the project is already started the project or if I'm going to start for the first time. So I guess this is the kind of questions I have to go like linearly in my mind and ask the questions. Like I have to choose one to assume the scenario that is most likely, and I think that's gonna be this case where you start from code and then later on you wanna change from the GUI. So in this case, I have to assume that there isn't a thing probably, because the first time you're running is from the code. But obviously, I think it's better if I check. So I think the first step would be to call project settings on the thing, then try to get the main thing. If there isn't a main thing, then I have to see what. If there isn't main thing, then there is a new project. So maybe I separate the main function on this control flow. So I was thinking about this already. Obviously, I'm going to separate into steps, but then I can break down these steps based on this. So here I was thinking about. So probably I think I'm gonna do this next. So I just create the functions here and just leave them with nothing. But the way that I'm thinking about it is probably you create a main function that is gonna be the entry point for bring out the initial state of the project. Then on this function I can break down based on these situations. So I think that this is something that is clear now on my mind based on the global signals, is that the relationship between enums and strings is based on the gradient of variance. Because enums represent reference frames in the same way that you can have UTF-8 or other standards to determine what happens. So it's based on gravity, I think. The more mass, the more clear is the boundary, the more incentivized you are to use an enum, and the less clear, the more incentivized you are to use a string, because string is more dynamic, because it's gonna become a state machine, I think, to use strings. So I think in this situation, it might be better to use, it's probably better to use an enum. So that's probably what I'm gonna do. So create an enum that represents common scenarios of, so I have to create the chart that I was talking about. It's like similar to game theory chart, or of the standard situations that are just gonna happen. So, and I think it's just a combination of which one you start first. So in my mind, there's a gradient of because a project is a cycle like everything else, and during this cycle, you're gonna have the variance of data. It's gonna represent the complexity of the code. So You have the beginning of the project, the end of the project, and then in between you're gonna have the variance of complexity that is gonna converge or diverge depending on how you're looking at it to infinity. And that's gonna be the difference of the projects. And on that you're gonna have patterns. So there's gonna be 4 main situations, I think. So either you start from code, edit on GUI later. Start from GUI, edit on code later. These are the main ones. I think this is only this true. The question is, how does this change? No, there isn't this true because the end matters as well, I think. So, so the other ones is do everything from code and do everything from GUI. But the GUI one obviously doesn't matter. Maybe do everything from GUI and scripting. But this actually doesn't matter, so it's probably just history. Because if I want to do everything from GUI, then it doesn't matter. Or maybe no, maybe it does matter. So change a finished project. But it doesn't matter because I think that this one and this one is the same. I think it's just this main tree. And I think that the variance is going to be, like I said, it depends on how it fluctuates because it's going to be a frequency. So the cycles are frequencies because of the fast Fourier transform. So like obviously, this is the part I think to clarify. How does the complexity of the data is going to change the frequency of the cycles of going back and forth between these two things? Because that's going to determine the complexity of the code. Because obviously it's better if I design everything keeping in mind this frequency of going back and forth between them to know what kind of patterns are going to happen. So I can structure the functions in a way that handles the most common things. I think obviously one example, I think the easiest example to think about is you have a component that usually you're going to do, which is a GUI element, and that component makes a lot more sense to start from code. So you design the function based on that. I'm gonna do some tea and I'm gonna think about this. But maybe it's not that relevant as well to spend a bunch of time. I think I'm gonna start doing already. So what I have in mind, just create a function here. So maybe get initial state or something like that. Then this function I'm gonna divide based on these variations here of situations that I have to clarify in my mind. Then after I do this initial states, so here I'm gonna have to I'm probably gonna have to add classes on this atlas. Yeah, I'm gonna create another class here, another file, and create a class store states. Or maybe I don't need to because it's gonna be on the project settings. No, but I think I do need. So this is the kind of thing because it's gonna be related to the stuff that I was talking about. So the complexity of the class is gonna depend on these situations here. Because then it becomes a question of what's the best way to structure the data instead of the class to represent the common scenarios. And this is going to be related to because the variance of the project is going to determine the folder structure on here, and whether or not, let's say I want to develop multiple projects at the same time, then it changes how the structure of the class is going to work. Or I want to develop projects that connect with each other. And so store states, initial states of projects on some data structure. Probably class. Then based on this state, so maybe here is going to return, so initial state, I create a class, and then I make it equal to this, whatever happens here. And then based on this, I do control flow based on enums that reflect variance, which is going to be, so this enum is going to depend on how I think about this stuff here. Let's create archetypes. Yeah, I'm gonna do the initial thing, and then like it's gonna depend on what I want to create. So I think I have to create a project in the beginning to see, to clarify my mind on what do I want to do here. If I think about the spectrum, it's gonna be on one extreme. You only use this to develop one project ever. And then on the other spectrum, you use this to develop like millions of projects at the same time. So this is the gradient. And then the optimal strategy is probably going to be on the middle between the two. But I think that maybe it's not in the middle. I think it's more for one project because it doesn't make sense to do a bunch. So the range depends on how the complexity of the projects and like what is going to be the purpose of each one and how common they're going to be. So the complexity of the project, which is the structure of the project, the data structure, the variance of that's going to determine the ends of the spectrum when it comes to the polarity here. And that determines the function. And I think that's pretty much it. So on this shoe, there's going to be these branches based on this stuff that I'm talking about. And then at the end, I think this one is always going to be pretty much the same because of instruction set architecture. So the way that I'm thinking about this now is I have to remember how the editor does it, but yeah, because it's gonna be on some file that I forgot. But there is a file that the editor uses to get it's export presets file, I think. So on this file here, you have the configurations. So what I can do is manually go into the platforms and then get the default configurations for each one. Then based on these default configurations, at first I can check to see if he has the file or not. Actually, no. It's probably better to write the file. But if I write, then it fucks up the other. But I think this part's not that complicated because there isn't a lot of variance. So it's just mainly the difference in platforms. So there's standard values here. And then based on that, I have a function that calls to export. Maybe this one is related to the initial state. Because if it's a project, actually, maybe not. I guess I can encode this on arguments that I receive here. But here is going to be depend. Like I said, I think I'm constantly going to have to change this code because that's the point. So maybe I don't encode this anywhere. I just change based on whatever I want. But there are two situations. One that uses the main exports templates. They're just the default templates, and other ones if I want to customize the exports. And this is obviously going to reflect the same functionality from the editor. And this is also obviously not necessary as well because it is not that important because I can just open the project from the editor and then manage exports. So I think I'm not gonna focus on this for a long time. Just gonna focus on the other stuff because it's harder and more important. I think either here or before this, I have to. The main thing to think about is this stuff here, is the variance of here, because I think it makes more sense to do the projects folder as a reflection of the games folder. So you create one folder that has all the game, and I might have changed this as well, so that's like, instead of Godot, instead of allowing to, but I think it doesn't matter that much. I can just make a standard based on the stuff that I want to do there. I actually I'm gonna get from the project settings. Yeah, so you get the name from the project settings of the project, and then you use the file access. But then, so I have to use the file access to see if the folder exists here. Yeah, that's probably better. So if the folder exists, then I don't do anything because it means that the project was already initialized. But if the folder exists, or if the folder doesn't exist, then I use the file access or dir access to create a subfolder here with the same name as the project name. And then is basically just going to be the C++ code that is a reflection of the project. And then the synchronization of them is the hard part, I think, should think about. Yeah, I'm gonna do some tea. Probably gonna be back half an hour or more. So I'll be right back. Alright, I'm back. I'm gonna ask ChatGPT what function or perplexity. What C++ function does Godot use to change the scene? Scene tree change scene. So it doesn't have only change scene. I guess it used to have and then they replaced. So this one is probably similar to the file one because of the path here. Yeah, so the path one is probably the one used. But I guess to create the game, it doesn't matter to create the custom classes, but it doesn't matter to. One of the concerns that I have with doing changing the functionality by creating new classes that doesn't scale very well. So it was something that it was making me think that it's better to use or try to implement GD extensions instead of doing that. Because for every new thing and this is kind of the thing it annoys me, is for every new thing that I want to do, I have to create a new class there. And I imagine that there's probably gonna be a lot of things, maybe. But maybe it's not that much. It's more about the connection of the things. And so I guess I have to understand that. So when you create a node and then you add stuff to the node, how does the scene file keep track of the hierarchy? The main thing to understand is the scene first, how to write to the scene. So it looks like it doesn't have anything at least directly related to the settings when it comes to this thing. It has some functions there, but so let me think about this. So maybe what I have to do, I think I have to start the debugger and then figure out what function calls the load sync first. I think it's gonna be on the notification of the node. So probably nothing happens here. It just initializes all this stuff when it initializes the editor, and then it pushes the editor to the child when you're running the editor version, and then it's probably on the main iteration that is gonna. The main iteration, it triggers the events, and then once it triggers that event, something on the notification makes it call the load sync functionality. And then on the load sync functionality, I've seen there that has some stuff related to the settings, I think. Yeah, it localizes the sync based on the. So I think it's just this integration that happens. So I'm going to load again and see if I can find. Hey man, what's up? It's going good? So the question is, how is this related though? I guess I can search for the. How is this? This has to be related to the main scene thing, I think, to the main scene that it is declared here. So the question is, what is the difference? So when you open a project that doesn't have a main scene, what happens here? It has to look for the main scene at some point. I think opening with the debugger is probably easier, to be honest. Oh, so this one is interesting. So maybe I should put, yeah, I should put breakpoints on everything that is related to load scene. Because obviously it's going to be one of these functions that call the other one. Hmm. No, I'm just trying to clarify how everything is connected together. I'm trying to figure out how does the editor perceive the project in the first time that it runs the project. So it's probably this function. Yeah, I do remember that it comes from this one. So in the beginning, I know this is gonna. So I'm gonna try to run the debugger with the other option that I created there. That it has a new project doesn't have the. Actually, this one is for the project manager. So I'm gonna create another configuration for the other project. Or maybe, no, whatever. I'm just gonna put this one. So the other project that I created doesn't have a sync. I'm gonna get the path there. I just scene study. So I'm gonna run with for both the. So first thing that I have to do is just figure out the main functions. Probably put a breakpoint on everything that calls load scene. Then I run the debugger first from this one's. So I run first from the project that doesn't have main scene to see what happens. Because the annoying thing is that I don't wanna have to create a new project every time that I add a scene to for the first time to see what happens. So I wanna compare the one that has the main scene and one that doesn't have to see what is how does the editor data is gonna keep track of the scene and if that matters at all. It's probably from the perspective of the editor, it doesn't matter. It only matters to run the scene, but it doesn't matter to save the file. It only matters to know what it is the current scene, because then that's gonna depend. That's gonna change what file you're writing to. So like the change scene, the functionality related to different scenes is only relevant to the new classes on the modules that I'm gonna do because those classes change. Those classes will change how to. It's probably gonna be the case that I have to. I'm gonna create only one class. That class is gonna be the one that I always use to change the scene. It's probably gonna be a button. I don't think I need to create a new class though. This is kind of the confusing part, I think. Because the editor, they just use the same classes and then they change whatever is gonna happen to the nodes here. But if you want to use the code to compile to run, that's kind of the problem because oh, but they do create new classes though. I guess yeah, this is kind of the thing that is annoying because for each thing that I'm gonna do that is different, I need to create a new class. That's the reason why I wanted to do them together first because I think it makes more sense because the functionality here is gonna depend on the amount of classes. Maybe not because it's always gonna be it's gonna reach a threshold of stuff that I always use. So this, I'm not really sure. I created a class called SceneView, which overrides SceneTree. That way I can keep the Godot functionality, but extend it. Yeah, that makes sense, but the problem is not the structure, it's how it grows, how it scales. That's the issue. Like if there is too much variance on new components, because I think that the scripting functionality has variance, a lot of variance. And that's the reason why using scripts makes sense. But in a way, they are both adding resources. So, but it just feels a lot, it feels that it doesn't make a lot of sense. So every time you create a new class and then I'm not really sure about it. Yeah, so this one is the one that sets the configuration. It depends on the P file here. Interesting. I think it is not good because like the creation of the class is gonna be on one place, and then the connection between classes is on another place. And that feels kind of bad. If it feels it's gonna be annoying to develop this. Also, there isn't you're not gonna be able to put functionality that creates everything. Because when I think I'm not really sure if it matters that much though. I don't think I'm gonna use GDScript. I think the difference is basically the way that they do the editor here, where like on the editor node they use a lot of other classes. So basically the modules is just gonna be like a library of all the classes, and then the other code would be like building the editor node, where you're just composing a bunch of these classes together in a way to form components. But it makes more sense to me for them to be coupled with each other. That's the thing. But I think it doesn't matter a lot because it doesn't matter if you make available for everyone because it changes how many classes the engine is gonna have. Yeah, this is the thing. Maybe it does change because maybe it's better for each class to be associated with its own project. That's the thing. So it doesn't scale very well. And I guess what I can do is just change the place of the code, and then that's the same thing. So instead of putting on the modules, I just put in the same folder. I don't like the idea of being forced, though, to implement script functionality by inheriting the class. Something feels off to me about this. What do you mean by adding patches? I think the option to add the script is always there if you want to, because the new classes are just inheriting from classes that existed before, and everything inherits from object anyway. So the object is the thing that has the scripting functionality, so you can add the script, but I don't like the idea of using GDScript. Uh, I prefer to, if it comes down to having to use the script, I think it's better to just use GD extension and then figure out how to do it with Python. That to me that makes a lot more sense. But I still don't like the idea of separating the languages. I want to think everything on the same framework, let's say. It makes it easier to think about everything. But obviously, there could be these challenges that I don't know, and that's obviously possible. So I don't think this should matter, but I'm gonna put breakpoint 0 anyway. I'm just gonna run with the debugger and see what happens there. So I'm gonna run the one that doesn't have a main thing. I'm gonna try to run, see if it's possible. Then I try to see what happens in the beginning. We did it in such a way to allow scripting, otherwise you run into difficulties. At minimum, expose things in such a way that you can configure things via script. Yeah, but like I said, I think it is this way already. Because everything inherits from the object class, and the object class is the one that allows you to implement scripting functionality. So if I want to, I can always use GDScript, because all the classes that I'm gonna do, is gonna inherit from object. So it doesn't really matter that much. But I don't think I'm going to do it because I'm gonna try as much as possible to not use it. Just do everything on C++. I might at some point try to see if I can change the functionality of things in a different way than creating a new class. But I think probably it does make sense creating new classes. It's just that decoupling of the module, of the place where I'm creating the classes and the place where I'm going to compose different components based on these classes is the thing that is kind of weird to me, that I'm not really sure. Is that's more complex. It's a lot easier to think about it if I think about only one thing, just the main thing that I'm trying to do now, just create the graph there. That's a lot easier to think about because all I have to do is create the graph node there, and then I change the functionality of that one depending on what I want to happen. But if I want, like when it comes to creating multiple different things, then that's where I'm not sure about it. As if you want to reuse the graph in multiple different places, that's the thing. But or if you want to create multiple variations, but I think it doesn't matter that much. It's probably. I guess the thing is, I'm not gonna be able to. I am going to be able to. Let me think of this. Actually, the reload scenes is just gonna be. This is the problem, is because of the whole ECS, Entity Component System, and the way that they do things here. It forces you to use object-oriented. So I guess on the headless thing, I'm not gonna be building any components. All the functionality of the components are implemented on the classes. I think that's the part that I don't like, because you're forced to use object-oriented programming. The functions is just more about creating the tree, I think. Creating and managing the tree. I put another half an hour, then we'll stop. Yeah, but signals is not the current signals that they have is not really a composition. It's more because on the signals you need to have a direct connection between things. I created a global sync class that allows you to communicate with different nodes that are siblings. But I'm talking more about like if you want to create a new component, for example, what you have to do is create a new class. And then you use other classes inside of that one to create the component. But you can't really create a function that creates a component. That makes sense. Because there is no way to save the state of the function on the sync file. That's the thing that I'm thinking about. So let's say, for example, I want to, like in a similar way that React works, like I want to create a function that is gonna, like if I want to create a function that is gonna use a graph to build like nodes and other stuff like this, I can do that, but then the final result is just gonna be the final data structure that has to be implemented on the class itself, because the class is the thing that is going to hold the state that the engine is going to use, because the engine is going to use the sync file. There is no way for me to hold the state of the function so that I make the function be the thing that the engine runs. Unless I change the way that they store information, which I guess I can do as well. Something to think about. So if I could change the way that they read the sync file so that I can add information of a function to run instead of a class. But I'm not really sure if that makes sense as well. Because the function is running directly the way that I'm going to build there. But it's just changing the state of the tree, or the structure of the tree based on the way that I build there. So it is different because it forces you. If I don't want to do that, then like the question is how would I change? And the problem is that I think, but maybe, maybe, yeah, maybe because I can create other classes that use composition. I don't know. Yeah, I'm not. No, but it's still I'm forced to inherit from because I need to inherit from the object and the node and all the other stuff. Interesting. I don't know enough. So it depends what you want to do. My Office system works using resource ID. You'll find many classes just wrap the behavior of. I don't know enough about resource IDs and the server parts to know. Yeah, I also think that is very good. Just trying to clarify my mind if there's gonna be a problem based on the stuff that I want to do. Because I know that there is another version of Godot that is called Godax, and it's basically Godot but with entity component system design. But I didn't spend a bunch of time studying that version to understand very well what is the differences, what are the differences. And something, it doesn't feel very good to me, this whole thing about, but maybe it's just because I'm not used to this. But I think that you have to inherit a class to change the class behavior. It feels kind of weird. Like, it feels weird when it comes to implementing the scripting functionality. But I'm not really sure why. I definitely will at some point check the server classes. Not sure when though, because I don't know how long it's gonna be to figure this other stuff out. I just set it or not. So it's getting these things from this config file. I remember seeing this config some point, but I don't remember. Obviously, it's one of the files there on the root of the project, but I don't remember. It's probably this one. RIDs are allocated using RID owner, and it is designed in such a way which that the memory only grows. Yeah, I remember seeing that. There's a video that he talks about, right? Yeah, did a talk on that. I saw that video. It's actually a very good video. But I didn't spend a lot of time. I know that the shaders are very confusing to understand. I spent some time trying to understand. Yeah, I can imagine. He created the engine. Probably knows everything. Are not pre-built. It was complicated because of the. I think it's just Vulkan that is very complicated to understand, and because there's so many other things happening on the setup there related to the servers. Yeah, I think like one of the things that it makes it very hard is just C++. Like because of the way that they build the whole design and the way that C++ works, that is just object oriented, and there's a bunch of abstract classes, and it's just the nature of the thing that because it works for a bunch of platforms and it has a bunch of abstract classes, and there's a bunch of stuff that happens on the setup, it becomes kind of hard to understand how it works, which shader is used for what, and stuff like that. The documentation is obviously very good. Oh, fuck. I'm not really sure, man. Just gonna see how it goes. For now, I'm trying to create a component that I created on the front end. It's called SoftVis. So I was building this stuff on the front end on a website, and I'm trying to reproduce the stuff that I created there in the beginning. But obviously, I'm thinking about like how everything is gonna evolve. So this part is the one that is confusing. But mainly, the reason why I created the graph component there on the module is because I'm going to recreate this thing here. So the graph class that I have there is going to be the one that holds everything. Then each one of the balls is probably going to be mesh instance 3D. And then I checked to see if Godot has the same shapes there that I use. So I'm just going to translate the algorithms I use to create this thing into the classes there to create this visualization. Then I'm going to probably use control nodes with the same Godot pattern. Choose this to recreate this stuff here that keeps track of the variables used to solve the thing. There's different algorithms as well. But on the browser, it's extremely slow. And also you have to deal with a bunch of stuff from React. It's not very good. And there's so much stuff actually to learn as well. Just remember about the animation and other things. But I think it's not going to be as hard as I thought it was going to be. The more I think about it. Because Godot already has everything built into it. So it becomes a lot easier. It's just about figuring out the correct classes and then figuring out how to change the data and putting everything together. The main thing that I'm not liking now is the thing about the... Because it's a different way to think. Yeah, but I'm not really sure if it's similar because I built this with React, but the way I think about the component here, I guess it is kind of the same thing. It is going to be, the only difference is that this is on the DOM tree. And the way that the state is updated is different because obviously this is using React. So yeah, I guess this is the communication between those maybe. That is kind of weird to me. I think it's more the composition between, it's the gradient between composition and object-oriented that I'm not really sure if it's going to scale well. That's kind of the problem. Because when I think about this, like these components here, I think I use the function. So basically you keep the same pattern and then you use a function to recreate a bunch of them. And then these ones are going to be a part of the overall thing, which is a data structure. So there are some parts where like creating a function makes more sense, but then there isn't a way to encode the information on Godot unless I make the function part of the class, and that's kind of the problem. But the more like, it's probably just it's just because it's different, so it's kind of weird to me. But I think it's probably the same thing, because at the end of the day, like this, the overall thing would be a class anyway. So it's probably just a different way to think about it. That's why. What sort of game are you planning to make? I'm not really sure, man. We're just gonna build this stuff first and see what happens. I think I'm pretty close to building this. I pretty much already know everything. The other thing that I'm gonna have to spend a bunch of time is like understanding, but I think it's quite easy to understand because all you have to do is just call the high-level functions from Godot to do the matrices manipulations. One thing that might be kind of annoying is the camera and the events. The events are going to be annoying to figure out how to... Yeah, I think that the most annoying is the events. The events, the positions of things. Those are the main things that I have to figure out. But I'm only going to focus on that after I finish after I finish understanding how to write everything. Yeah, I imagine. I never looked into Unreal Engine, but everyone like it's probably one of the most advanced. I wouldn't say it's easy. I was in the beginning. I was trying to create everything from scratch, and it was extremely difficult to like even just to create the text was very hard. So it makes you appreciate a lot more what these people built. It's actually very incredible because when you look at everything, it's very complex. I think I was trying to find packet scenes here. I'm just gonna continue. Sure. It's easier to find from here. So it doesn't have anything because there is no scenes. It is getting this from this stuff, which is gonna be editor node. There's a member variable this. And then it's using this config file to get the value. So I need to remember what this config value is, config file. I do remember seeing some this stuff here, but I don't remember where they save this. So I guess it's gonna, but for my thing it probably doesn't matter because it's just what does matter is this load scene. So like how are they gonna? There's just no. It's probably gonna be my zone. I do believe I saw this at some point. I guess I have to figure out how the classes, like how the data of the classes is stored on the file. I think that thing should be written on the file. This was what I was realizing. So if I want to create the same component every time, this thing here, then what, like, let's say I want to reuse the structure, but then just implement this on several different places. And obviously what is going to change is the data. So I do think I can save the data because the data is going to be just based, it's going to be member variables of the class. So I think once I figure that out, yeah, I have to figure out this main, maybe I should write down everything that I need to know about the state, the relationship between the state of the class. And how Godot writes the file. The other thing that I can do, which is, it might be actually faster than what I'm doing. You just manually change a scene or a class, like change all the values and then write down the changes on the file. And then I can create the patterns myself to write. But I think that it's not very good because there's chances for errors, I think. Config file data is stored exactly the same. But I'm talking about the it probably is the thing. It's one of these files, right? That is stars. I don't remember really well if it's this one or something else. And it's probably this file here that is getting there. The config file that gets there is probably this one. But I'm talking about the scene file. It doesn't have here, but on the other one. So when you change the data for the class, I'm pretty sure it's going to store here. So let's say I create a mesh instance 3D, and then I change the value of the radius of the mesh. So here, as far as I understand, when you select the mesh there, so probably it's just like that it stores. So it probably uses the sub resource for everything. So because I selected the sphere there, it creates this sub resource. But then the question is this ID here, which is probably a hash that they use. And this is how Godot's gonna know that the mesh instance 3D has updated its default member variables. So this is the stuff that I'm thinking about now, because I have to figure out how to write this. Because obviously I'm gonna change the state of the class in the beginning. And this sphere mesh is here. It's the same thing here. But obviously they probably use some function from project settings or something to write this stuff there. So I don't think I need this config file because I can look from the project settings. For the finding the main scene, I think I can look into the project settings and then I can figure out like just the project Godot file and figure out if it has a main scene or not. But this is the thing. So I guess this is the other thing that I have to figure out. So if you save a scene, so I'm gonna save after I spend some time with this. I'm gonna save a scene and don't make it main scene. I assume it doesn't. Does it change? Yeah. So there's basically this tree. Like one, you don't have scenes. Have scene, but no main scene. Have scene, don't have main scene. So all I have to figure out is on these three scenarios here. The one that is the most confusing is this one, because I think that it's going to change the state of the editor, but I'm not really sure if it's necessary for me to know that. Because these ones I think I can just read directly from the project Godot. So when it doesn't have main scene, I do something, and when it does have, then I do something else. But if it has a scene but is not a main scene, then is the editor going to perceive that differently? But I think it doesn't matter that much. It does matter actually. So it comes down to how it's gonna read the resources, I think. Usually in there, all classes that is serialized have bind methods. Usually in there is class bind method. There is and properties where the getters and setters are exposed to the editor. Yeah, I studied that already, but I'm not really sure how it's gonna translate into the scene file. That's the thing. Because what I'm trying to do is just write directly to the file. And then the engine is gonna, when the engine runs the game, what I think is gonna happen is just gonna find the resources which are based on the project Actually, when you export to the game, it's just gonna put the resources, which is based on the project. So either you embed on the engine everything that you have, or you put on the package file. So the engine is gonna get those resources, which are gonna be the files of the scenes and the GD script you have. Then based on that, it's gonna run. So the states of the classes is gonna be reflected on the state of the file, which is this one. So in order for me to create something from straight from codes, it's much easier to just write the stuff to the file. And this is what I'm trying to figure out. I'm gonna do that as well. And I know you can use project settings to load, but it's more reading and writing from to the file in the format, same format that they use. So basically encode the information. So I think I closed the file, but I have a file there that's I'm going to put a function, and then based on the function, it's going to load the settings from the project, and based on the state of the project, it's going to create different classes and change the state of the classes depending on what I want the scene to look like. Then based on that state, it's going to write to the scene file without opening the editor. Then maybe later on, if I want, I can just open from the editor, and because it's the same files, it's going to know the state of the game. But so essentially, I want to be able to do both in case. So either write everything from code or use the GUI or both. Yeah, project settings stores stuff on the props variable there. But the editor uses this config file. So I think it doesn't matter probably. It matters to the extent of the second point there. When you have a scene, but the scene is not main scene, I think. Yeah, so it is like I was saying. Oh, but this is the file system. Hmm. Oh, I was thinking that it would be on the editor node, but I was imagining that it would happen on the notification because that's like where it makes most sense. The first time that is loading everything is like there's an event layer on the main iteration that is gonna call the notification for each node, and on this one, it's gonna see if the thing has a scene. So now I know that it's gonna be based on the config file there. This config file equals this function. So load open scenes from config. So this file is gonna be the one that tracks whether or not you had a scene open last time. You did, I think. So I have to spend more time looking into this one. And it does that based on this after it emits the sources changed event. So the other thing you can do is obviously look for these events. But this happens on this other thing, which is probably got called somewhere else. I'm just gonna do this. So it's called on the constructor. No, it's this is the notification, is not on the constructor. Just because the notification is run inside of the Judy class macro, but it isn't on the constructor. Yeah, so it happened on the process group on the sync tree. And so I guess it after it initializes everything, then it calls the thing for each one. So it is the first time that it's rendering everything that it's gonna call the function here. And then because the thing has the notification, it's gonna call there. So I guess I can press a 5 now. I'm just gonna press F5. So main things that I have to figure out. Do I have to go back? What I'm probably gonna do now is put breakpoints to remember what. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that the config file is that config layouts there. But I'm not really sure if I do need to. Because this might be only relevant to the editor. The main thing that I have to clarify is what happens here. Is the editor data thing. Is at what moment does the editor data at what moment is the editor data updated? To keep track of this thing. Or does it matter to know this or not? Because the main thing is to write is to make sure that if I write things, it's not gonna fuck up the state of the editor. So because if I do the simple check to see if the project has a main scene or not, it might mess up the state of the editor. Or I have to clarify more as well. How does the editor know about the project structure? It's probably gonna be on that class that gets called on the notification, which is related to the file system from the editor. So that class probably has all the functionality related to this kinds of things. Editor file system is this class here. So I might have to understand this resource ID now. This is a resource loader. I think I'm gonna stop here. I need to spend time clarifying exactly because it's very confusing now. What thing should I do first? But I do think that everything's becoming more clear. It's confusing to know. It's confusing to separate the stuff that the editor does and the stuff that I actually need to do. So the main things are figuring out how editor basically the main thing is just get states, change states if depending on gradients of projects started, middle, ends, which is the gradient that I was talking about there in the beginning, which is the options that I talked about. So either I start from code and then do the GUI, or start from the GUI and then do the code, or do everything from code. Most likely what's going to happen most of the time is start from code, then do the GUI later. So the start and this gradient here, I think is the same gradient here that I already suspected that there is going to be this problem. So that it seems that the main thing to clarify is this thing here is that the main thing to clarify is the relationship between the main thing and the editor and also the other resources. But this is going to be connected to the way that it reads and writes the files. But I'm thinking about in the initial thing to get the state first. But it's obviously going to be related to the other resources as well. So not only how does it get this thing, it's basically on the get state, you just get the state of all the things and how are the things connected to each other. I think that's the. I'm not really sure if the editor knows that. I don't think it needs to know, but I'm probably. I think that's the main difference. It's probably one of the parts that is confusing because I probably need to know how the things are connected. Should think about how to build from code the whole thing, but the editor doesn't because the editor is only concerned about showing one thing at a time. So I have to spend a lot more time thinking about what is the best way to clarify how does it read and write to the sync files and these distinctions to know how to think about structuring the function there, which is probably going to involve using project settings to get the states, then maybe using this ref config files from the editor. So basically get all the files related to I have to write down all files related, all classes and all classes and structures related to getting initial resources for projects. I'm gonna make a list of this to know everything that is related, then put breakpoints. I'm gonna write down this on the snaps there. This part is the one that is confusing because it's probably different from the editor than what I'm trying to do. So I can't really think about the editor stuff because I might have to. I obviously gonna do things differently, but you know, breakpoints on parts I think are crucial to get states of projects because I'm gonna use the state to just check whether or not I need to synchronize with the GUI. Maybe I'm gonna have to implement in the same way that they do versioning system. That way I'm gonna know. So that way, yeah, I think versioning system is probably the thing that I'm gonna have to do because that's how you synchronize. So that way I can check based on the version from the code whether or not it's more. Yeah, but then yeah, but I might have to do. I might change the editor code as well to change the versioning. And that's how I synchronize. Because then it doesn't matter which one I'm currently doing. It's just gonna. It's probably easier than getting the states of the thing. I think I'm going to think about this later after I do the initial stuff, so I don't get stuck. A list of all classes, structures, with breakpoints on parts. I think are crucial to get states projects. What else? Then right. But which I pretty much already know. Just resource save. But I haven't spent time figuring out in what format does it, how it translates the states of classes into the scene files. After I do all this, then I go over with the debugger. I have to think about a better way than doing a bunch of different projects, but I'm not really sure if there is any. Just see the differences of a project that doesn't have a main scene, the other one. Because I think that it might change based on files that they cache or something like that. I'm gonna stop here. I'm gonna think about all this stuff. Then next time I'm gonna continue to do this. So now the next step is to work on the headless thing to create the projects. So I'm gonna work on this function. I'm gonna spend, yeah, I'm gonna do step by step. So next time I'm just gonna spend a bunch of time creating this initial function here. I'm probably gonna try to do stuff before I figure everything out. I think that's better. So next time I'm probably just gonna create this function and then start trying to call the files. But maybe I don't have enough information yet, so I might need to spend some time before. So basically get all the functions that they use there on the high level and then try to use those ones to create a project without using the GUI. I think that's probably the best thing to do. So I'm gonna do both at the same time. So learn a little bit and then implement and see what happens. And basically focus on just creating one project first. And once I do that, I just iterate over this. So yeah, see you next time.